They mocked the veteran for the strange, spidery trenches he was cutting into the dry earth around his land, calling it Whitaker's folly. But one sweltering afternoon, his loyal dog, Scout, refused to leave a rusted iron door set into the foundation of his old adobe house, as if he sensed something hidden deep below. And when the 100-year drought the town never saw coming finally arrived, turning the valley to dust, the place they all laughed at became the only thing keeping people alive. What did the dog uncover, and what did the man know before everyone else? Stick with us to the end to find out, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Cal Whitaker's property was 10 acres of what most people in Mesquite, Arizona, considered unforgiving land. It was a sun-bleached plate of gravel and creosote bushes, tilting gently toward a dry arroyo at the base of the rust-colored mesas. When he'd bought it with his discharge pay, the consensus at the town's only diner was that the former Navy SEAL had finally found a piece of ground as quiet and stubborn as he was. But Cal didn't see a wasteland. He saw a system waiting to be restored. His work began not with a house, but with a shovel and a surveyor's level. For months he did little else but walk the land with Scout, his German shepherd, at his side, observing the faint, almost invisible lines where water had once flowed during the rare monsoons. He wasn't just digging ditches. He was meticulously excavating and restoring a network of channels, some no wider than a boot, others as deep as his waist. He lined them with flat stones he hauled from the arroyo, creating a web that crisscrossed his property, all converging on a low point behind the small adobe house he was slowly repairing. The place itself was a study in practical engineering. The house had thick walls that held the cool of the night deep into the following day. He'd built a shaded ramada over the western side, breaking the assault of the afternoon sun. But his real work was largely unseen. The trenches fed into a series of gravel-filled filtration beds, and then into 2 massive buried cisterns he'd coated with waterproof cement. Beside them, he began constructing what looked like a sunken courtyard. He dug down 12 feet, creating a protected pit shielded from the searing wind and direct sun, and began filling it with rich soil he trucked in from the river valley. This was his garden, a place of cooler air and precious moisture. His partner in all of this was Scout, a dog as disciplined and observant as Cal himself. Scout didn't bark without reason and moved with a quiet economy that mirrored his master's. He was Cal's shadow during the day, lying in the thin shade of a mesquite tree as Cal worked, and his guardian at night, his ears swiveling to catch the sound of a coyote in the distance. There was a single photograph on the simple wooden mantel inside the house, a faded image of a young man with Cal's jawline, standing in this very spot, a hand resting on the head of another German shepherd. Beneath the porch, half hidden by overgrown sage, was an old cellar door, its iron bands rusted, its lock seized solid. Cal had noted it when he first arrived, but his focus had been on the land, on the water, on the slow and patient work of preparation. The door, for now, could wait. The town of Mesquite measured a man by the size of his herd, the yield of his fields, or the loudness of his talk at the cattleman's bar and grill. Cal Whitaker failed on all counts. His weekly supply run to the general store was a source of low-grade entertainment for the locals. Jedediah Vance, a third-generation rancher with a flushed face and a booming voice that filled any room he entered, was the unofficial ringleader of the mockery. He'd corner Cal by the sacks of feed, a smirk playing on his lips. "Still digging to China, Cal?" he'd ask, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You gonna strike water or just bake your brain out there in the sun?" A few of Jed's ranch hands would chuckle along, their laughter echoing the sentiment that Cal was an outsider, a man touched by war and paranoia, wasting his life on a fool's errand. They called his trenches Whitaker's Folly and joked that he was building a moat to keep out imaginary enemies. Cal would simply nod, his gaze steady. Just getting the place in order, Jed, he'd say, his voice calm and even. He never offered a longer explanation, never tried to defend the logic of his work. He'd pay for his goods, load them into his old pickup, give Scout a quiet command to hop in, and drive back to his dusty 10 acres. There was one person who never joined the laughter. Sarah Chen, who ran the general store after her husband passed, would watch the exchanges with a quiet disapproval. She was a practical woman who had known loss and understood the value of foresight. She saw the methodical purpose in Cal's calloused hands and the clear intelligence in his eyes. She didn't see madness. She saw a man preparing for something, and she respected the dignity of his labor. Sometimes, after Jed and his crew had left, she'd offer Cal a quiet word. "Don't you mind them," she'd say while bagging his groceries. "A man's got a right to work his own land his own way." Cal would give her a rare, small smile of acknowledgement. "Appreciate that, Sarah." He'd leave the store, the screen door slapping shut behind him, and drive back to the silence of his property, where the only judgment came from the sun and the only sound was the scrape of his shovel against stone. He'd sit on his porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the mesas in shades of orange and purple, Scout's warm weight a comforting presence against his leg. He'd look at that old, locked cellar door, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes, but the trenches always called him back. The work was what mattered. The rest was just noise. The reason Cal worked with such relentless focus was buried deeper than any cistern. It was etched into him by the memory of a sun-scorched ridge in Afghanistan. He'd been a young SEAL on a reconnaissance mission that had gone wrong, a miscalculation on water, a delay in extraction. He remembered the cracked lips of his teammate, a good man named Diaz, the way his voice had become a dry rasp, the final, still quietness. They had been the best, the most prepared, and they had been defeated not by the enemy, but by thirst. Cal carried the weight of that failure, the quiet, unshakable knowledge that all the training and firepower in the world meant nothing without the simple, elemental necessity of water. He had not come back to Arizona for an easy life. He had come back to honor that lesson, to build a place where the fundamentals were secure. His grandfather, the man in the photograph, had understood it. He'd homesteaded this land a century ago, but Cal knew little of his methods. One afternoon, the pattern of their work changed. Scout, who was usually content to doze in the shade, became fixated on the rusted cellar door beneath the porch. He stood before it, whining softly, his body rigid. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't respond to commands to come. He just stared at the door, occasionally scratching at the weathered wood. For 2 days, the dog kept his vigil. Cal, who trusted Scout's instincts more than he trusted most people, finally set aside his shovel. He took a heavy pry bar and a hammer and went to the door. The old lock was fused with rust, but after a dozen hard blows, the hasp groaned and snapped. With a great effort, he heaved the heavy wooden door open, revealing a set of steep stone steps leading down into cool darkness. The air that rose up smelled of damp earth and thyme. With a flashlight in hand and Scout at his heels, Cal descended. At the bottom, he found not a small root cellar, but a vast, hand-dug cavern. It held 3 enormous stone-lined cisterns, their surfaces cool and slick. They were empty, but they were masterpieces of forgotten engineering. On a dusty workbench in the corner sat a tin box. Cal brushed away the cobwebs and opened it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather-bound journal and a letter. The letter was from his grandfather, Caleb Whitaker, dated 1938. Cal sat on the stone steps, Scout's head on his knee, and read the careful script. "To whoever finds this, I pray you are my blood. My name is Caleb, and I built this place to withstand the great thirst. The old-timers, the ones who learned from the natives, taught me that this valley has a rhythm, 100 years of plenty, and then a lean time that breaks the proud. I have seen one such time, and I write this so the knowledge is not lost. The trenches on the surface are not for irrigation. They are for harvest. They catch the dew of the morning and the scant rain of the monsoons, and guide every precious drop to this cellar. These cisterns, if kept, will hold enough water for a family to see through the hardest years. The world above will turn to dust, but this place will hold life. I did not have time to finish the final connection from the surface catchments. The war came, and I was called away. I leave this work in the hands of Providence, with the hope that a man of foresight and strong back will one day come to this land and understand what I began. Water is life, and sharing it is a prayer. Do not be proud. When the time comes, open the door. Cal folded the letter, his hands trembling slightly. His work was no longer just his own, it was a legacy. Cal now worked with a new and solemn urgency. He understood the signs his grandfather had written about because he was already seeing them. The sky, once a brilliant, aching blue, had taken on a milky, hazy quality from the persistent dust in the upper atmosphere. The wind, which used to carry the scent of rain and creosote, now felt like the breath of a furnace, dry and brittle, carrying nothing but grit. The desert wildlife, usually shy and elusive, grew bold with desperation. Coyotes trotted along the road in broad daylight, their ribs stark beneath their mangy fur. Javelina herds, which normally stayed in the deep arroyos, began appearing near town, searching for any hint of moisture. Cal saw these things and knew the rhythm was shifting. The 100-year cycle his grandfather had written of was turning. He intensified his preparations, his work bordering on obsession. He spent a week clearing the final, debris-choked channel his grandfather had mentioned, connecting the surface trenches directly to the intake of the vast underground cisterns. He tested every seal, mortaring any cracks he found in the old stone. He doubled his supplies, not of food, but of things the town took for granted. Filters, gaskets, spare parts for the hand pump he installed as a backup to his small solar-powered one. He reinforced the entrance to the cellar, ensuring it was secure against the elements and the increasing dust storms. Scout, too, seemed to sense the change. The dog grew restless, patrolling the perimeter of the property with a low, anxious energy, his ears constantly twitching. He would often stop and lift his nose to the air, tasting the dry wind for a sign of rain that never came. One afternoon, Sarah Chen confirmed his fears. "My well is taking an hour to refill after I run the pump for 10 minutes, Cal," she said, her brow furrowed with worry as she rang up his supplies. "Never seen it this slow." Later that week, Jed Vance waved away the concern at the diner. "Just a dry spell," he boomed to his audience. "Always happens. The monsoons will come, they always do." But Cal, looking out at the pale, washed-out sky, knew this was no ordinary dry spell. This was the beginning of the great thirst. He went home and, with a sense of finality, opened the main valve, allowing the first trickle of captured dew from his trenches to flow down into the deep, dark, waiting cisterns his grandfather had built. The quiet sound of water echoing in the cavern was the most beautiful sound in the world. The drought did not arrive like a storm. It seeped into the valley's life, a slow, creeping thief. The summer monsoons, which should have arrived in July with thunder and spectacle, never came. August passed in a haze of heat and dust. By September, the Verde Seco, the river that gave the valley its name and its life, had dwindled to a muddy trickle, then a series of stagnant pools, and finally, a ribbon of cracked, sun-baked earth. The town's municipal well, drilled deep into the aquifer, began to pump sand. Then the water turned brackish and salty. Finally, after a week of groaning and sputtering, the pump fell silent. The town's ordinary defenses failed one by one. Lawns turned from brown to gray. Ancient cottonwood trees along the riverbed dropped their leaves, their branches stark against the pale sky. The heat was relentless, buckling roads and straining the electrical grid until transformers blew, plunging the town into powerless silence at night. Jed Vance's ranch was the first to show the true cost. His wells ran dry. His cattle, which had roamed across 1,000 acres of what used to be grazing land, now stood listlessly in the dust. Their hides stretched tight over their ribs. He was forced to sell off most of his herd for pennies on the dollar, a lifetime of work evaporating under the merciless sun. The town's spirit began to crack. People who had been neighbors for decades eyed each other with suspicion over the dwindling supply of bottled water at Sarah's store. The state began trucking in water, but it was never enough, rationed to a few gallons per family per day. While the valley suffered, Cal's 10 acres held steady. His sunken garden was an oasis of impossible green, the broad leaves of his squash plants providing shade for rows of tomatoes and beans. The air in his small adobe house remained cool, and from the hand pump beside his porch, clear, clean water flowed in a steady, miraculous stream. He moved through the unfolding disaster with the same calm efficiency he applied to everything, his self-built place holding against the slow-motion collapse of the world outside. The quiet trickle of his water system was a sound of defiance, a testament to the foresight of a man long dead and the hard work of the one who had listened. The turn to his door began not with a crowd, but with a single, quiet request. Sarah Chen appeared at his gate one evening, her face etched with worry. "Cal," she began, her voice low, "it's not for me. It's for the Hendersons. Their baby is sick, and they're out of clean water to mix formula." She didn't have to ask twice. Cal filled 2 5-gallon containers from his pump and helped her load them into her car. He said nothing, just nodded. He knew it was the beginning. Word spread quietly, a desperate whisper through the parched town. A few days later, another family came, then 2 more. They were shamefaced, avoiding his eyes, the memory of past mockery hanging heavy in the air. Cal met them all with the same quiet dignity. He established a simple rule. Come between sunrise and sunset. Take only what you need for the day. He set up a logbook to ensure fairness. There was no gloating, no hint of "I told you so." There was only the steady, rhythmic creak of the hand pump and the life-giving gush of water. Then, one blistering afternoon, Jed Vance's dusty pickup truck rumbled up the long drive and stopped. The engine cut out, and for a long moment, the rancher just sat there, staring at the impossible green of Cal's garden. Finally, he got out, his usual swagger gone, his shoulders slumped. He held his hat in his hands, turning the brim over and over. Scout, who had been lying on the porch, rose and stood beside Cal, watchful but not growling. Jed wouldn't meet Cal's eyes. He looked at the ground, at the trenches, at anything but the man he had ridiculed for months. "Cal," he said, his voice a hoarse croak, "I'm not here for my cattle. They're mostly gone. I'm here for my wife, for my kids. Our tank is empty." Cal looked at the proud man, now broken by the thirst, and felt not triumph, but a deep, somber pity. He simply nodded toward the pump. "The containers are in the back of your truck, Jed." Jed nodded, a look of profound relief washing over his face. "I'll help you fill them," Cal said. As they worked, the silence was broken only by the pump and the splash of water. The place they had all called Whitaker's Folly had become their only hope. For 47 days, the rain refused to fall, and Cal Whitaker's land became the heart of the community. A new routine settled over the valley. Each morning at dawn, a line of pickup trucks would form on the dirt road leading to his property. People would fill their containers, exchange quiet news, and then leave, allowing the next group to come forward. The system his grandfather had designed and he had restored held strong. The water level in the deep cisterns dropped by inches, not feet, a testament to the vastness of the underground reservoir. Cal's property was no longer a place of solitude. It was a center of shared survival. People started to give back in the ways they could. One man, a mechanic, noticed a squeak in the hand pump and spent an hour oiling and tightening it. A group of women, seeing how little time Cal had for his own chores, started tending to his sunken garden, weeding and watering with the very water his system provided. Jed Vance became Cal's most devoted assistant. He arrived every morning before anyone else and stayed until the last person had left. He directed traffic, helped the elderly with their heavy containers, and learned the intricacies of the trench system, clearing any debris that might block the next hopeful flow. One evening, as the sun was setting, Jed finally faced Cal directly. The two men stood by the cistern intake, the air cooling around them. "Cal," Jed said, his voice thick with emotion, "I was wrong about you. I was a fool. I thought I knew this land, but I was just living on its surface. You listened to it. I'm sorry for every word I said." Cal looked at the man, whose pride had been burned away by the drought, leaving something more honest and solid in its place. He simply clapped a hand on Jed's shoulder. "We're all just trying to get by, Jed. Now we're doing it together." In the shared labor of pumping water and tending the garden, a new community was forged, one built not on old hierarchies, but on the quiet generosity of the man they had once called crazy. The unwanted, mocked trenches had become the lifelines that held them all together. When the drought finally broke, it came not with a gentle shower, but with the full force of a monsoon. The sky, pale and hazy for so long, turned a deep, bruised purple. Thunder rolled across the mesas, and the first fat drops of rain struck the dust, releasing the rich, earthy scent of petrichor. For 3 days it rained, filling the arroyos, soaking the parched earth, and replenishing the wells. The town of Mesquite breathed a collective sigh of relief. In the aftermath, they counted their losses: the cattle, the crops, the savings spent on survival. But against all odds, they found that they had lost no one. Every single person had made it through. The lesson of the Great Thirst was not forgotten. Led by Jed Vance and Sarah Chen, the town council voted to create a permanent, community-wide water security plan. They didn't hire outside engineers. They asked Cal Whitaker. Using his grandfather's journal as a blueprint, they began to build a larger network of catchments and public cisterns, turning one man's private foresight into a shared public trust. They called it the Whitaker Water Project. Years passed. The valley remained green. The new system, maintained by a rotating crew of volunteers, ensured that the town would never be so vulnerable again. Cal grew older, the hard lines on his face softening. Scout, his muzzle now a noble gray, spent his days dozing in the shade of the sunken garden, which had become a community plot. Cal never sought credit or praise, preferring the quiet rhythm of his days. Eventually, his time came. He passed away peacefully in his sleep, the sound of the wind in the mesquite trees his final lullaby. The town mourned him not as a hero, but as a good neighbor. They didn't build a statue. Instead, they placed a simple carved stone marker near the main town cistern he had helped them design. On it was an inscription taken from his grandfather's letter, a phrase that had become the town's unofficial motto: "Water is life, and sharing it is a prayer." The strange, obsessive work of a man the town had once misunderstood had become the legacy that saved the whole valley, a quiet testament to the man who listened to the land and the loyal dog who stood by his side. And so we see how sometimes the people our busy world overlooks, the quiet ones who do the hard work without an audience, are the very ones placed in our lives to protect us. Their foresight might look like foolishness, their preparation like paranoia, but it is often just a deeper kind of love, a sense of duty that runs as deep as a well. The world is full of people like Cal Whitaker, tending to their own small corners, preparing for a storm others refuse to see. Perhaps the question for us is, are we willing to listen? Thank you for joining us tonight. If this story touched your heart, we'd be grateful if you'd like, share, and subscribe for more like it. And as always, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. May you have the wisdom to prepare in times of plenty, and the grace to share when times are lean. Be well, and God bless.